Thanks, Paul. Great to see everybody. Thanks for this opportunity and all the great work that ODI are doing. I don't think data has ever been as important for forming the background to decisions that affect people's lives, particularly during this pandemic. And the work that you've done and you continue to do is absolutely crucial to the city, and I think to a much wider group of people these days. So thanks for that. Thanks also, before Chris speaks, to TPP for the work they've been doing with us and others to help us track the virus and try and get ahead of it. It's been really crucial, and you'll hear more, I'm sure, from Chris about that. In my 10 minutes, I thought I'd talk as much about the national role that I had, because that tends to be the one people are all interested in and pretty obsessed by at times. The work that's going on. It's hard to explain to people just how intense the period of work was when I started in the second week in May to the middle of July, working for the government, as well as being chief executive of Leeds City Council. I do say to people it nearly did me in, and it actually did. I wouldn't recommend having two jobs to anyone. The challenge was enormous in the sense that a test and trace system had been set up at the centre as a result of the what happened during March, where the test and trace capability that we had in the country through Public Health England and the public health teams in local authorities was obviously overwhelmed by the exponential growth in the virus during that period. And I think there's a big debate that people will continue to have about the reasons for that, and why it happened and when we locked down and all of that, which I won't go into for obvious reasons. But what they tried to do after that was to come up with a national system that could have the capability to operate at scale, and that's when the testing capability started to be ramped up, and with that the tracing capability as well, with a contact centre, national contact centre arrangement, whereby you would basically deal with a rising and significant number of cases, as we're finding at the moment. Again, I won't go into the debate about where testing is and whether it should be further on than it is, and how all that is going. Suffice to say that there is it's an absolutely fundamental building block of keeping on top of any virus. The bit I was brought in to do was to basically create a local element to the system, a bit like the German model, whereby you would have a local foundation of test and trace and contain activity that would keep try to keep on top of the virus at a local level, and that led to what's called the contain framework, and the local activity that's actually kept us, has been pretty successful through the summer. But it is now, obviously, with the second wave with us, we're finding it extremely challenging to stop the spread of the virus as it's happening as we speak. And that, as I said, is to do with having a national testing system and tracing system that works, and having that linked into the local activity. What came out in over the course of that period was that the more local you make something, the more effective it is. And so the capability of the local testing and tracing is close to 100% actually, in terms of tracking people down. It's the more generic and I guess slightly more distant national attempts to track people down that are not quite as effective, and so there's constant work going on to try and bring that together. Just bringing it back to data in the time that I've got, there was a big one of the biggest challenges I had. If you can imagine being in a job where every single thing you did was under a microscope of the national media, And that's because every household in the country is interested in what you're doing, because it affects their daily lives. And so I went from being bothered about what was on page 7 of the Yorkshire Post to being pretty relaxed about being on the front page of the Times or the Telegraph and on the Today programme. And so you just have to recognise that this is a massively challenged environment where data becomes really, really significant in news terms. And so access to data was a massive challenge for me through that period. And I basically worked with the centre and with the Director of Public Health to free up the use of data for a much wider range of people and access to that data from the local public health teams. It's still not quite there. I think there's more that could be done to open it up even further. But we made a lot of progress. And the other thing about the data which was interesting and remains interesting in that is that the main figures that people looked to make decisions about, so the rate per 100,000 that you'll see that at the moment in Leeds today is in the late 80s. It'll probably move into the mid 90s tomorrow. That's one of the key building blocks of the decisions that are taken and what's in the public consciousness about how we deal with the virus. But as important, as you know, as data experts, are the trends. So how much are we accelerating or decelerating? Also, other key data like what's the positivity rate is as important as that absolute data as well. So looking at both of those and cutting through with that more nuanced message has been very difficult for people. And what I advocated from the start was the more open we can make the data, the better, because you've got to be able to almost wake up in a city or a town across the country and see the weather forecast and also see what your COVID rating is. And if you can do that, then you get people on side. If you give them confidence in the data that's available, then that can only help. So it's a work in progress to keep that going. There are many other things I could talk about. We need the strongest possible partnership between national and local organisations and national and local government through this next period. I would like to see us think about the mental health of people and the economy working well in a COVID safe environment, rather than the sort of feeling that you're making a difference by forming restrictions that sometimes don't actually work in practice, in how people are complying with them. So we've got to think outcome as much as input, and that's where the data element can really help us as well. So the more we can be able to measure how much people are complying, how much people are on side with what we're trying to do, the more we can build that consensus that we get to a point where peer pressure is so much more powerful than a national diktat or a local diktat from the council. If we can create a city peer pressure where people are calling people out actually and conforming to what we're trying to do because they buy into it and they think it's fair and they think it balances the public health element with the economy and the mental health and living your lives element, then that can only be a good thing. So, that's the big thing that I'm trying to achieve at the moment. There's a good chance we'll enter into further restrictions as we go through this week and into next week. But the key for me through the winter is striking that balance between putting the right restrictions in place, being able to enforce them effectively, but getting the public's consent and buy-in to what that means for them. And that does require, I think, through the winter, more of a balance between the health, the people buying into the fact that you don't really need to mix in your own house with other households because that's where the virus transmits, but maybe more buy-in to the fact that we need to allow people to meet up outside because the science shows that's okay. Meet up in retail venues where if you're wearing a mask and you're operating in a COVID safe environment, that works. And meeting in hospitality venues, pubs, restaurants, theatres where a very COVID safe table service, socially distanced, physically distanced environment exists. So that's the next stage. So I'll finish there.